Hi, I'm Jamie Edwards, and this is part 3 of my story of how I got really into lean software development. You can go back and watch part 1 and 2 if you go to the links at the bottom of the description of this video. So let me get back to where I left off in part 2. At the end of part 2, I was talking about how I was at that time working at a consultancy, and I was having some experiences that really humbled me quite a bit, that really showed me how important it was for software developers who really want a long career and want to really be able to influence people to be able to develop better, not just soft skills, but actually consulting skills. You know, when you really think about the term consulting and you look at the book I mentioned in part 2 from Peter Block, Flawless Consulting, consulting is really about getting your skills used. You know, even if you're sitting on the couch trying to advise your spouse or something like that, just trying to give somebody advice, they may take the advice or may reject it. And a lot of that depends on how effective you are, not just as a communicator, that's definitely important, but how effective you are at understanding that person and their circumstances. So bringing this back around, in the last 3 or 4 years that I was at this consultancy, you know, I began to work on more and more different types of projects. You know, the technology was changing all the time, but really what was more interesting is I started to notice more and more patterns about people and specifically about the outcomes of the projects. And I started to feel like I was seeing that, you know, even though we were implementing continuous delivery for clients like I was talking about in part 2, and even though, you know, we were using a lot of the best practices or good practices at that time around automated testing and all these types of things, it was kind of like a lot of ceremony, meaning you can go into a company and use the latest technology and have automated deployment and be able to release to production 3 to 5 times a day and be doing Scrum or Kanban and, you know, whatever the latest processes you want to use. But at the end of the day, the business really needs to make money. And the way that people have developed software in the past, you can go back and watch many of my videos on lean software development. You know, if you've been watching this channel, that a lot of the ideas that product managers and CEOs and founders of startups have turn out to not be good ideas. And so, you know, a lot of people think you get to a point with a product where got market fit, you know, we've already determined what the customer wants, we've been selling it for a while, we're making a profit, and so they don't need to actually think about the way they develop in a lean fashion. And what I want to talk to you about today, that's kind of the continuation of my story, is a little bit about some of the work that I did while I was at that consultancy on the side to try to start up a couple small software product companies and just see how that went. And I learned a lot about it. And both of those startups failed, but I want to talk a little bit at the end of the video about some of the revelations that I sort of had going through the experience of trying to start up a couple companies myself, and then how that was able to actually translate to starting this YouTube channel and some of the things I'm doing in my career now. So the first startup idea I had, this was about 5 years ago now, maybe 6. I have 3 children and they're all homeschooled. My boys are adults, young adults now, very young adults. But at the time, you know, I had 3 kids that were all homeschooled, and I was not homeschooled. I had 1 year of my education where I was homeschooled, but you know, as a father, especially somebody who is in corporate America, as many software developers are, it was really difficult sometimes when I'd come home from work or I'd be talking to my wife about what kind of work the kids were doing to be able to know how they were doing. You know, when you homeschool your children, there's a huge amount of different ways you can do it and a ton of resources and curriculum and things like that. And you know, you can usually find the standardized testing that people use in the public school system and kind of give those same tests to your kids to see, you know, how they're doing. But, you know, part of the whole reason that we homeschooled is we were really disappointed, unfortunately, with the quality of the education in public education now. And, you know, I'm not here to try to sell you on homeschooling. It takes a ton of work, and it's not for everybody. But what really ended up happening was my wife and I started talking about how we could find a way to have the kids track, you know, how much time they were spending on homeschooling and which subjects they'd studied. And so after about a year of talking about this and drawing up some things and just having brainstorming sessions, I started work on a product, and I used Ruby on Rails because at that time it really, and I still believe this, it's one of the most productive frameworks for churning out a product quickly. Now, today, a lot of the new hotness is microservices and single page applications, and Rails definitely has a place to play its part in that ecosystem. But really where I think Rails shines is if you have a small to medium sized business, or you're just starting something up and it's not necessarily a viral product with millions and millions and millions of customers. It's a really solid, fast, efficient, fairly straightforward to understand by developers framework. And so I used Ruby on Rails. And I created this product. It was called Kinlighten, and it was for homeschooling parents or families to set up an account for their family, and they had a schedule, and they could say which subjects their children were going to do on certain days, and if they're following the unschooling method, which is where you kind of don't even have a schedule and you just have your kids sort of ad hoc work on different subjects, you could actually go in and just record time that your kids had spent on certain subjects anytime. And there was gamification, there were like badges that the children could get depending on how many hours they put in, a whole bunch of different things. But at the end of the day, I spent, probably 1.5 to 2 years building this. And it was partially, if this was my full-time job, there's no way it would have taken 1.5 to 2 years. But, I was doing this on the side of my consulting job, and which was a lot of work already. And so, I could only work so fast being a father and, having responsibilities with my wife and my kids, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, long story short, by the time I got the first beta kind of ready to go for my first few beta customers, well, Rails had like maybe even 2 major revisions. There were a lot of new technologies that had come out. There were a lot of new user interface interaction patterns that had kind of been introduced over that time that people were starting to expect, for example, on their mobile devices. And I used Bootstrap, which is a framework you can use, you're probably very familiar with it, to skin the product to make it look really good on mobile and tablets and TVs, responsive. Everybody's pretty familiar with responsive design today. But at the end of the day, my first few beta customers, there was such a disconnect between what they wanted and what I thought they wanted and what was valuable to me and what was valuable to them. And there was a lot of stuff I spent a lot of time building that was completely useless to them. And then there were a few things I built for them that they really liked but were way underbuilt. And life happened, and I had some things happen with my kids and my family, and kind of didn't have the time to put the focus on it that I wished I had. And this is, your typical common story of somebody who's trying to do a startup at the same time as a full-time job with a family. I basically stopped at one point. I really felt like I didn't have the energy to keep going. I needed a partner, somebody to help me. The more I was kind of looking at the market and I was looking at other homeschooling software and products and curriculum out there, I really felt like there was just a different problem that I wanted to solve if I was going to really run a software company. So I shut down that startup, and really one of the things that I was most frustrated about was, hey, I've been in software development now for, at that time, I think it was like 15, 16 years, and teaching companies through consulting how to do Scrum and how to do Kanban and all these things. And using some, I think I used Pivotal Tracker for that, just to track my own stuff. But when you've got one person working on it, actually more development process is going to slow you down. So you actually want to, keep straight what you're working on, but not have a whole bunch of overhead with process. Well, forget about the development process. The product management aspect, figuring out how to go about finding the right market fit and how to design the features the right way so that they're as small as possible. A lot of the things I was helping my clients with, I really did a bad job at it. And there's a book out there called The Knowing-Doing Gap, and it's kind of underscores what happened to me, which is, I could advise people, and I could teach people, and I could show people and educate people how to do lean product management. But then when I went to do it myself, it was really hard for me to take a lot of my own advice. So anyway, fast forward, this startup folded, and so then I kind of doubled down on my day job. And through consulting, unfortunately, I had a string of about 5 or 6 projects towards the end of working at that company where there were a lot of problems on projects that I was not on, and the company would send me to the problematic project to essentially rescue it. And sometimes the project was in trouble because of things that happened with the client. Sometimes it was things that were my company's fault. But things happen. We're humans. Stuff happens all the time. And I started to see a pattern, though, of what was often happening was the same thing that was happening to me when I was working on the startup that I mentioned. We would sign a contract with a client. We would go out there and start doing some work, we being my company, not me necessarily to start the project. And the way the project was set up, it wasn't really set up so that we as a consultancy could help the client succeed with their business. It was really, we were just building them a solution. And so inevitably, if we got a year's worth of work or something like that, we'd be chugging along, helping them with stuff, and all of a sudden the world would change and they'd want help with new things. And we didn't really structure the contract to handle those types of things. And their company really wasn't set up to handle those types of things. And even though they had, DevOps and continuous delivery in place and things like this, they didn't really know how to utilize that as a business. So, I started to get really frustrated and started to try to get sort of my foot in the door more with the product management side of things. There's a lot of really well-known people on Twitter that I follow that are thought leaders around product management, and specifically lean product management, that really are not sort of ex-developers or developers like I am. I still write a lot of code, and my skills are very current with technology. But there's a lot of people who have kind of been career product managers that they're even starting to see how necessary this stuff is. So I talked about in part 2, The Lean Startup, the book from Ries. And I had heard about the book at that time, and I knew some of the concepts just from other material I'd read, but I never actually went through and read the whole book yet. So as my day job grew increasingly frustrating, and I began to be essentially a firefighter that they would send out to fix troubled projects, and I got really good at this. The problem was it started burning me out. I was spending more time fixing problems and fighting fires and rescuing, troubled projects. And a lot of times I would go out there and bill, and, sometimes the company wasn't even getting paid for my time because we were, giving it to them for free to help them. Other times, maybe the client, it was their responsibility, but they were really frustrated. Anyway, long story short, my day job really wasn't going the best. And I had been trying to get DevOps and continuous delivery and lean product management to be sort of like an offering that we could go around to our clients and start to sell and really promote. And there was a lot of resistance at that time. I think the company just didn't see how crucial it was. And by the time they did see it, they were already 2 or 3 years late to the game, and some of their competition was already doing it and had a more effective sales message and marketing message than they did. So a good friend of mine that I had worked with for many years, invited me to breakfast and had an idea for a product himself. And one thing led to another, and the next thing you know, we started building this product. And it was really, I thought, a great market to offer the product in. It was a really noble and interesting problem. It was a real pain that customers had, potential customers in that market. There were a couple things, though, that happened that I think doomed that project from the outset, that startup rather. One was both me and my friend, who were essentially co-founders, had, I have 3 children, and he has, I believe, 3 children now as well. And when you're trying to start up a company and you've already got a day job, you really need to buckle down and work hard and really sacrifice, unfortunately, some of the time you'd normally spend with your family to get that company off the ground. And I think it was just asking too much of us to have the time and the will to really pull it off. And I spent probably about a year just wrestling with the technology and building the first version of the product, and really, working, 12, 14-hour days on the weekends and stuff like this, just to get this thing out there and to our initial customers. And at the end of the day, we just weren't set up. I think our relationship and where we'd drawn our lines of responsibility, we weren't really clear up front about, this is what you're responsible for, this is what I'm responsible for. And we talked about it a few times, but we never really did anything about it. And so, I'm still friends with him and stuff, but, it really didn't work out from a just, our relationship began to become taxed. I think partially we just started to get really burned out and frustrated. So that was one of the things that I think doomed the startup. The second thing, though, the technologies that we needed to use, it was a lot of, big data and business intelligence technologies. And we were doing all this in the cloud. And at that time, the technologies that we were using were under tremendous change. The cloud vendors that we were using, originally we built this product to run in Amazon Web Services, and we ran it that way for about 6 months, and we're kind of getting beta customers looking at it. And then we had some features that were up in Microsoft Windows Azure, Microsoft's cloud, that were very compelling for visualization, and we decided to move the product kind of to that. So it was just a lift and shift. We moved the product, but then we started to integrate with some features up in Microsoft's cloud, and we had some really, I think, more compelling, better, visual experience for our customers. So we got some beta customers, and our target market was, at that time, it was universities that were teaching people how to manage hospitals. And so, we got some initial beta customers, and they started using the product, and we started to get some feedback, and it was pretty clear early on that the feedback that we were getting was quite disruptive, and there was going to be a lot of work that was needed to actually accommodate that feedback. And we'd already invested at that point 1.5 to 2 years of our life. Very similar problem to the previous startup, the homeschooling one that I mentioned, in that we really just didn't have the time, and I think we just didn't have the will to keep pushing forward, and we had overinvested. So at this point, I really, I was frustrated. We eventually folded and closed that startup, and like I said, the co-founder and I still have a good relationship. We don't talk a lot, but we were both frustrated, but I think we were okay with kind of where it ended. It was what it was. But once that started to shut down, and I continued to work with, consulting clients through my day job at that time, I just got this sense that if I'm going to actually continue to be passionate about software development, because I was really frustrated, to be honest, at that point, and if I'm going to have something that I can go out there and really feel like I can say to people with a straight face that I have a high amount of value to offer their company that's not available everywhere else, I really felt like I needed to understand, how do I help companies leverage their software team in a really lean way so that they can build something and get it out there and get feedback on it way quicker than I was doing in my startups and my companies, my clients that I was working with that had, automated deployment and continuous delivery and weren't, again, utilizing that capability fully. And so towards the end of that startup, the second one that folded, I read the Lean Startup. And when I read the Lean Startup, it was kind of similar to the continuous delivery book in that I sort of felt like, oh my gosh, here's a person who has been, following my career and sort of inferred a lot of the things that I've run into and come up with some really great solutions. And by now the Lean Startup is very standard practice, especially in the West Coast. Eric, I think, teaches some courses even at Harvard about how to apply it and things like this. But what I've found is that knowing how to be lean with how you build software and actually doing it are very different. And like I talked about in some of my prior videos about winning trust from people, I think one of the issues is if you look at even things like DevOps. I've talked about on this channel about how DevOps really is about taking developers who are paid to introduce change and operations who are paid to keep the system stable and bringing those two people together even though they have conflicting motivations. But the industry often talks about DevOps like it's tools, it's technology, it's automation. Well, unfortunately, I think Lean and Agile are suffering from some of the same thing, that I think much of the community looks at those two terms and the ecosystem of technologies and processes around it, and they focus heavily on just the development team and helping them crank out code faster and higher quality and things like this. But they're missing really the point that it's all about having the mindset that you're going to fail in some way at the beginning. And you can go back and watch, I did a video on how to fail faster and how that'll actually help your software projects do better and be more profitable, and that's really what I'm talking about. But one of the fundamental things that I think I've realized through these experiences in my career is, if you think about if you're a software developer and you're on a team that's doing Scrum or Kanban, you need to estimate your work. Whether you feel like you're ready for it or not, you're usually pressured into some sort of estimate. And that task you're estimating is usually pretty small. It might be 4 hours or 8 hours. I mean, it depends on how your company does the estimation, but the point is usually to estimate a small amount of work. And you as a developer, when you finish that task, you find out early how good you were at estimating, and you often find there's something about your estimate that you overlooked, and hopefully you then incorporate that to your next estimate, and you incorporate that to your next estimate. So really, in some ways, doing rapid releases and small amounts of work, it's really great for continuous improvement. It's helping you improve your skills. Now, if you as a developer, though, work on sprint after sprint after sprint after sprint, or you're doing Kanban and you pull task after task after task after task through the board and work on it and release it, and you just keep getting your estimates wrong, very soon, in fact, it depends on the company you're at, but this can even happen in a few releases, you're going to start to get pressure from management. Hey, you don't seem like you know what you're doing, and there's going to be some accountability, and there's maybe going to be somebody that's given to help you to try to do a better job estimating. Well, one of the problems that we have when we don't do lean product management, and a company, you can go back and watch my video on a minimum viable product, I get into more detail on this, but if a company or a startup founder like I was for my 2 little ideas that didn't work out, if you got a vision for all these different ideas, and you get a job to go work at a company as a product manager, and you do all this upfront research and usability studies and all these things, and then you actually put that in a backlog, and you just start taking slices off the backlog and having your team work on it and release it, and having them work on it and release it. And you just keep releasing stuff, and you never actually know or have a solid and measurable way to know whether each change you're making is actually helping the business. It's not just, a perceived, oh, I think customers like this. Well, then a product manager doesn't really have to deal with the ramifications of any incorrect decisions or assumptions they made about the product until all the money's spent at the end of the project. So they may be chugging along, spending money, releasing for, let's say, 6 months to a year to exhaust some budget that they won to work on a project. And it's not until that 6 months to a year to 2 years, however long that budget was allocated for, that at that point the business is going to look at the product manager or the vice president or whoever it is that's driving that product, that design of that product and its goals and how it's going about its features being released to the market and how it's trying to meet the needs of its customer. It's only at the end that often what happens is if the project didn't meet its expectations, they fire the person, right? Or because they find out, hey, you built a whole bunch of stuff that didn't meet the business goals, and you didn't do a good job basically predicting the future, which that's the whole point. Who can do that these days? Nobody can. So I think just like we as developers, we work on small little tasks at a time, and we get an opportunity every time we release something to find out, did I not maybe handle all the edge cases properly? Am I not testing well enough? Does my customer not like certain things based on the colors, or am I not estimating right? Some simple things that aren't tied to the business, but that are more tied to how good I am as a developer. The developer has checkpoints very regularly where they're given an opportunity to get support from the rest of the business to improve how good of a developer they are. But if you're the person steering the ship of the product and you're not designing experiments, you can go back and watch my video on A/Bing software. I talk a little bit about that. Well, then there's not really an opportunity for that product manager or that startup founder to actually find out that they failed early and make a decision to change something about it. Well, I think one of the biggest reasons why this is the case is that there's not enough psychological safety in place at that company to allow leadership to fail. And leaders at maybe the executive level, the C-suite, and maybe immediately below those if it's a larger company, they're essentially trying to do a whole bunch of work and acting like they've got it all together and acting like they've done all their research, and that their assumption is nothing that they've assumed is going to be wrong, or maybe a little bit. And so they kind of go about business, and they don't have to be called on how right they are about that until a lot of work's been done by a lot of people. And only then, does the bell toll and they eventually get fired or thrown out, Well, I don't want to see product managers people that have brilliant ideas and great designs have that happen to them. And I don't want to see other people who have ideas for software products fail because they have that same issue. So a lot of the reason I created this channel, and one of the things I really want to help mentor people on, is when you go about starting to instill psychological safety into a company so that people can actually make these kinds of changes and feel safe that they're not going to get fired if, let's say you're a product manager and you have 3 ideas and you release them over a few sprints, or you're doing Kanban and you release them over a few tasks, and you find that maybe one of your ideas was good but 2 were bad. Well, you need to have the culture in place, and your boss and the rest of the leadership, that product manager's boss, have to feel comfortable and know ahead of time if the product manager fails to meet some outcome, it's okay because they're experimenting, they're trying things, and they have to do that if they're going to innovate enough to actually find the right product and be successful. So this is how I got to this point in my career, is, over time and time again, working with other clients and customers. I've said earlier in this channel, I think I've worked with over 30 companies now on different projects, all kinds of different technologies, all kinds of different sizes of companies, all kinds of industries. Well, many, in fact, most of the projects I've worked on have failed, and not failed because they cost too much, although usually that was also accompanying the failure, but often because they just didn't deliver on their expectations. They didn't solve the pain the customer had. They didn't offer a compelling enough thing that was, interesting and attractive enough to really grow a user base. They didn't maybe iterate on the changes that they were going to make if they were theorizing, we want to increase the efficiency of how we're developing our operations, because sometimes that's why you'll make a change to a product, right? It's not to actually drive a monetary goal that's based on growing the product. It may be based on just, making it cheaper to do work. So being on so many projects over my career that I did amazing work, I had great teams, everybody loved what the technology team did, but at the end of the day, the project failed, nobody got the bonuses or rewards that they wanted. I got really sick of this. And, now having had this happen on, 2 startups of mine that I poured a lot of my time and energy into, I got really sick of that too. So, I've started now to really be somewhat almost militant about, if I go into a client to help them, or if someone asks me to mentor them, I'm going to not focus on, I've got tons of technology experience and tons of process experience, and I can help you with that. But really where I want to help people the most is, I want to help people who, you might be a software developer out there. You might be a product manager. Maybe you're, in charge of the DevOps group or something like that. And you've got a burning desire to do lean software development, or you want to do DevOps, or you want to do continuous delivery. You want to do one of these things. And that making that change is not just you sitting at a computer and writing code. You actually have to earn a seat at the table with some of the leadership and get to know them and understand how to convince people how to make the change that you're pitching them based on what's in it for them. So that's really it. That's kind of the story of where I am so far. Where I am now in my career is really, I'm still doing software development and architecture and, different various work for people, but I'm also available just as a mentor to anybody, and I do have kind of like a membership program that you can join if you're interested. You can talk to me about that. I'll kind of talk more about that as this channel goes on. But really what I want to help people with is not just the technology, but I want to help people that are great developers and great technologists actually be great at selling the changes that they need to make so that their products are successful, so that the company profits more, so that you actually get the opportunities that you want to make more money, have more of an impact, and really just have a great career. So what do you think? Give me your thoughts below about, you're hearing my story. Are there some things that are similar to what maybe you've gone through? Are you thinking about starting up a product? Is there anything I can help you with, or do you have any questions? And give me a thumbs up below. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You can click my icon on the right side over there, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.